morning, everyone. My name is John Gallant, and I'm from the Developer Experience team, otherwise known as DX at Microsoft. I just joined back in May to focus on IoT. Basically, my job is sort of a dream job. I get to work with partners, I get to build cool stuff, and I get to give feedback to the engineering teams on how to make their products better. So most of my work is hacking with customers. We bring them on site for a week, and we just go into code and build out whatever kind of proof of concepts need to be built. So it's really, really fun, and I'm happy to be doing that. Before that, I was in Power BI, and I was the engineering manager for Power BI Embedded, which shipped to Azure this year. So I was employee number 1 on that team, hired a team, built that thing in a couple of months, and shipped it. And then I was done being a manager for a while. So now I'm in IC coding again. It feels good. So I put up this slide basically to show that there's I have a lot of things that I'm interested in and things that I get paid to do, and this just happens to be a job where a lot of those things align. And the reason why I'm talking about Power BI today is because I like Power BI, and I'm hoping that a lot of you guys like it too, and are here to learn more about how to extend it. And so we're going to focus on custom visuals today, and how to send data to those custom visuals using the new streaming dataset API, as well as how to embed them into your own website using Power BI Embedded. So the custom visuals SDK, let's see. Actually, do we need to do an overview of Power BI? Okay, good. So Power BI is Microsoft's cloud-based self-service BI product that allows you to create BI dashboards and do business intelligence type work in the cloud. There's a desktop product as well that allows you to create reports and publish them to the web and share them with other people. If you go to bit.ly PBI index, you can see all of the Power BI resources available there. There's the consumer part of things where you would view a report, you would create a report, you would share a dashboard, and you would embed that into your website. And then there's also a dev story, which is the APIs, custom visuals, SDK, Power BI Embedded, and what else? I think that's it. Yeah. So we're not going to spend too much time talking about what Power BI is. I think that's good enough. Any questions right at the get-go of any confusion about what Power BI is? No? Okay, good. So I was part of the Power BI for Developers team, and one of the teams I was involved in created this new custom visual SDK. The original SDK was built by an intern and pushed out in sort of a sad state. So the FTEs came and rebuilt it using Node.js. It's way better than it was, but there's still a lot of room for improvement. As you can see right here, this is a liquid fill gauge custom visual that I've been working on for this talk. And I recently published it to the Power BI visuals gallery at visuals.powerbi.com. So I wanted to go from zero, as in no code, to a published visual in the gallery that other people can download and use in their reports. I wanted to get that full experience as an outsider so that I could come and teach you guys how to do that today. And there are some hiccups, some tips and tricks that I'm going to share with you guys. So a visualization basically is it's a representation of your data, and the reason why we talk about custom visuals is because there's only so much that can be communicated with a line graph or a bar chart, and sometimes those are the best options, but a lot of other times you want to have a custom way to represent your data. I came up with the liquid liquid fill gauge because I'm involved in IoT as well, and I'm working on water level monitors, gas, propane tank level monitors, things like that. So I wanted something that shows a value in a liquid form. I found this online. I talked to the author, and he gave me permission to use it. See, the idea is that you have custom visuals that are rendered inside of Power BI, but really they're just D3.js and JavaScript visuals underneath with a Power BI sort of wrapper, you could say, around that visual. And the cool thing is that I just took this code from GitHub. It's MIT licensed. Totally cool that I use it, and am using it in Power BI with like 2 changes basically. So it's cool that I could just find this visual and convert it into a Power BI visual. So what we're going to do today is we're going to actually just open up a command prompt. We're going to get into Visual Studio Code, and we're going to build this thing step by step. You can feel free to follow along, or you can just watch this video later, and we can go through it on your own time. I also have the blog here, PBI Custom Viz, which brings you step by step through each of these steps as well. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to, I already have Node.js installed, I hope. Install the Power BI Visuals SDK, which is just an NPM package. We're going to install a local cert. So one of the benefits of the new SDK is that you're able to preview that visual inside of Power BI, whereas before you would have to go into this custom tooling, not on PowerBI.com, try and sandbox. There was a bunch of setup. Now you just go and use what we call a development visual right from in Power BI, and I can show you that as well. That's the developer visual. We're going to create a sample visual, and we're going to test that visual in Power BI. So let's just switch over. OK, so here I have, this is visuals.powerbi.com, and this is my liquid fill gauge visual that I published last week. Let me just open that up. So you can see here we have screenshot of different variations of what it can be. You can download the visual, which downloads that, what they call it a PBI viz file, which is basically a zip file of all the assets needed for that custom visual, as well as a sample report that you can look at inside of Power BI Desktop. So you'll see visuals.powerbi.com has a ton of other custom visuals that you can use. These are all submitted by the community. I don't know how many of you were around, but a year ago we did a competition and gave away money and prizes and everything for people to build out these custom visuals. We got a lot of good submissions. I think the very first one submitted to the gallery was an aquarium, which I don't know how many people are actually using it, but it makes for a good laugh. So the first thing we're going to do is so if you go to PBI Viz Custom PBI Custom Viz bit.ly bit.ly PBI Custom Viz, you'll get to my blog, and it'll basically bring you through how to create a custom visual from scratch. And the idea is to take an open source visual and turn it into a Power BI visual. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to install the SDK. So the Power BI, there we go. This font might be too big. Let's see. So this is just installing that NPM package. That's published, just normal NPM package. I'm installing it globally, and that should install in a minute. And then what you want to do is install a cert. So the cert, what that will give you is the ability to run from PBI, PowerBI.com. You can view your visual as basically running as on a local development server that is part of the tooling. So we're going to install this cert here, and I should have it already installed. So PBI viz install cert. So that's just going to prompt you to install the certificate. I'm just going to do local machine, and I'm going to use the default options there. And I'll show you in a second what that's going to do. So this developer visual is what I was talking about before, where you can view the custom visual from PowerBI.com now. So you go to your Power BI settings, so just app.powerbi.com. You click on settings, and then you go to developer, and you say enable developer visual for testing. And what that gives you is this developer visual here. See the brackets over here? that gives you that developer visual. So whatever visual you have running in your local dev server, it will appear. As you notice right now, there's nothing running. We're going to run that in a second. Okay, so back here. So we've enabled the developer visual. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a test visual. So you basically, you execute a command. You say PBI viz new and give it a name. So let's do that. Okay. And so let me just decrease the font. This is a little big. Font. 24. Okay. So we have this test visual directory. So we're going to change to test visual. So all of the code needed, the scaffolding needed for your custom visual is now in this test visual folder. And I use VS Code to edit my custom visual code. It's a really good JavaScript sort of web-based editor. You can see here, so we just take a peek around here in the folder. We have a source folder, and that has this visual TS file in it. So this right here will be your main file for creating your custom visual. This is where you insert your custom code. Right now we have 3 methods. We have a constructor, we have an update, and we have destroy. So constructor just works like a basic class. Constructor will be called once per page load. And update will be called every time you get new data to the visual, you resize it, format it, anything like that. So then if I go back here, you'll see that you execute this command called PBI viz start. And what that's going to do is start a local web server that will serve up your custom visual so that you can test it on PowerBI.com. So let's do that. So it's just PBI viz start. And it will tell you that the local server is started. It's serving on port 8080. So now when I go back to Power BI and refresh, so you'll see that that's all I had to do to get the test Power BI custom visual up and running on PowerBI.com. So it's fairly simple. Before that would have been a nightmare. Now it's much better. As you can see, as you resize, that update method is called, and every time it's updating and basically incrementing. Okay. So that's the very first part of this series, which is just getting it going, getting it running, and just seeing it render on PowerBI.com. So the very next step, let's go back to, let's see, here. Any questions so far? Nothing new for anyone? You've done all this before? All right. Yeah. So the question was port 8080, how does Power BI know to call port 8080? And basically, so that development visual is coded to look at localhost 8080, right? And so you install a cert because Power BI is served HTTPS. You install a cert so that you can hit localhost at HTTPS over TLS. And so Power BI reads from your local server, not the other way around. Right. So when app.powerbi.com loads, it says I have a developer visual, I have a valid web server on the local machine. Now I'm just going to serve the files from there. Yeah. What? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I haven't changed the port, but I think it can be. Yeah, and it's just code, so you can. Yeah. So the question is, I have a customer who has a D3 visual. Can I use the same process? And that's a really good leading question to the next part. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So yeah, so D3.js is a common JavaScript visualization library that allows you to draw vectors on your screen, so circles and squares and any kind of random visualization that you need for your visual. And a lot of people use D3. Power BI uses D3. for its visualization. So yeah, totally supported.
So can any sort of third-party JavaScript component library be integrated?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'll show that in a second. Let's see. I will show that. Yes. All right. So now we're getting closer to developing our liquid fill gauge. So the next thing we're going to do is create this new visual. We're going to call it liquid fill gauge. We are going to reference and test out D3 just to make sure that it works, because there are a couple little tricks in there to get it to actually work. Then we're going to import the code that I found on GitHub into that page. It's not exactly the exact one I found. I made a couple of changes. I'll explain what those are. And then we're going to test it out. So first thing is get D3 installed. Did I hit the right button? All right, good. Okay, so all of the code for liquid fill gauge is out on GitHub. So if you just go to GitHub John B. Gallant, you'll see it there. It's referenced here. You can download the PBI viz, the sample, everything is out there in the open. So today we're going to do a simplified version of that visual. The full code is out there. So let's just create that. Let's go back in here. We're going to cancel out of that. I'm going to say PBI viz new liquid fill gauge. So that created my scaffolding. Right. I'm opening it up in VS Code. How many here are VS Code fans? All right. If you haven't tried it, it's a good lightweight alternative to Visual Studio, in my opinion. They ship updates, I think, once a minute. It's a lot, it's really good lightweight. Whereas Visual Studio takes a bit of time to load and run. This is very compact. Okay, so liquid fill gauge is created. It's the same as before. It's the same scaffolding here. So what we're going to do next is we're going to enable D3. So there are a couple little tricks to it. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a new file to the root of the project called typings. So D3 is considered a typing. So we're going to go into the root of liquid fill gauge here, and we're just going to create a new file. Okay. Call it typings.json. And I'm working with the Power BI team to make this better. But for now, this is what you have to do to enable D3. So look, I have my blog out there for these steps as well. So then what you want to do is open this tsconfig. So tsconfig is TypeScript config. So these visuals are based on TypeScript. I myself am not going to be using TypeScript. I'm going to be using just plain old JavaScript. But you have to register the files with their TypeScript system. So I'm going to say I want this file to be here, that new file that I just added, typings. And then I'm going to open up the package.json and replace the content of the file with the following. So you basically are saying when you package this visual, include D3 in it. So we're going to copy this. And that is package.json. I'm going to replace it. Okay, save the files. So then what we're going to do is, so if you notice here, there's an npm command here. We're basically saying install all the necessary files using npm to get D3 running here. So I'm just going to go back to my command prompt, and I should be able to just do npmi if I saved everything. Yep. So that's going through, and that's installing D3 into the visual. I'm hoping that it will be as simple as npm I D3 or something like that in the future. So I'm working with the team, like I said, to improve that. So then if you go typings global D3, you should see typings.js. So typings global D3. And that just means that the D3 TypeScript stuff has been registered. Okay, so now D3 is installed, but do we know it's working? We don't know. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the visual TS, and that is that's the file that we Here we go, source, Visual TS. This is the main file, like I was saying before, that we're going to add all our code to. So we're just going to verify that D3 is working. We're going to say, so Alt-Shift-F will format it for me. We're going to say, put a private variable called SVG into my class, and just call it a D3 selection, and it's going to be an SVG element. This is basically just saying there's going to be an element, it's going to be an SVG, and it's going to be D3 type. And then we have the updates. Basically, all I'm going to do is just draw a circle on the screen. If the circle appears, then D3 is working. So you go here. So you say, this is the constructor. I'm saying this code right here. I'm saying this SVG local variable. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to append an SVG element to it. And I'm going to give it a class called liquid fill gauge. And then I'm going to append a circle to that just to see if it draws. So if D3 is new to you, this is kind of foreign, but this is just standard D3 commands. So let's go into the constructor. I'm going to replace all of that, and I'm going to clean out this so it doesn't overwrite my DOM. Here. Okay. All right. So now we should be able to go PBI-viz start. Remember what that does is starts our local server and makes available to PowerBI.com. So let's try it out. PBI-viz start. All right, so it should be working, right? Let's go to Power BI. I'm going to refresh. I might have to refresh the screen. No. We have a circle, folks. Okay. So that's the first step. Obviously, these visuals are going to be a lot more complex than just a circle, but you want to have at least some, you want to get to some point where you know things are working. Okay, so that's step 2. Get a circle. And what we want to do is basically go to the next step, which is add our liquid fill gauge code, right? And this is where it starts to get interesting because we're taking an open source, D3 visual and embedding it into a Power BI visual. It's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. So the liquid fill gauge code, like I said before, is I updated a couple of things. I found one bug where it wasn't rendering inside of an iframe. So Power BI uses iframes to host their custom visuals. That way they're secure and they don't have access to things like making HTTP requests and so on. That way, when you share a report with somebody and it contains a custom visual, it's not doing things like attacking your computer and installing viruses and whatnot, right? So we call it sandboxing. The liquid fill gauge did not support being hosted inside of an iframe. So I made that change to the code. And I also made another change which basically, when the D3 visual itself was accepting a element ID, a CSS element ID, to grab that element by the ID in the DOM. And that wasn't playing nice with the way that Power BI does selection. So basically what I'm doing is I'm passing the reference to my SVG element into the liquid fill gauge code as an instance of that element. So if you go to this file here out on GitHub, this is my modified version of that liquid fill gauge code. So I'm going to copy this. This is a very risky demo. And I'm going to go liquid fill gauge.js. So this is that code that I found, right? It has 2 methods. It has a liquid fill gauge default settings function, and it has a liquid fill gauge. Basically, it's a function, but it acts as a constructor for the liquid fill gauge. Yeah. So we're going to go back. So those are the 2 things that I talked about here. I needed location in.href in the code for it to work with iframes, and then I'm passing the element. So this is something that wasn't done before. I took a look at doing this because I really wanted people to be enabled to create visuals based on open source code. But it turns out that you don't have to do much with TypeScript. So a lot of these D3 visuals are all JavaScript code. You don't have to do much with TypeScript. All you really have to do is add this definition file that points to your JS file. And you do that using this declare var liquid fill gauge any. You're basically saying any method in that file I will recognize. So you don't have to create this complex, TypeScript definition file. You just need to do this one thing. And this should work in most cases. So we're going to create liquid fill gauge .d.ts. So we'll go here, liquid fill gauge.d.ts. So that's a definition TypeScript file. And we just paste that in there. So that's all we need there. I'm going to save out liquid gauge. Okay, so now that we have those two files, we need to go back and say, my packager, PBI-Viz packager, recognize those files. It doesn't know they're there yet. So back into the TS config, we basically add these two files. So TS config, we're adding those two files. Looks good. Say it again? Yeah, so visuals.ts is, think about it as our host for the visual. Yep. And we'll see in a second, I'm going to be calling liquid fill gauge from visual TS inside of my constructor of visual and inside of the update method. Yep. You guys have really good leading questions here. Thank you. So that's the next step right here. So as much as I like my circle, I'm going to get rid of it. So it's the same here. I'm basically saying select that the root of my visual and turn it into an SVG. And then what we're going to do is we're going to modify that update method. So like I said before, update gets fired every time you have a change to that visual. So if you resize it, new data comes into that visual, this function will get called, right? So what we're doing here is we're saying inside of options we're gonna have a data view, and the root of that data view is going to, or the zero index of that data view is going to have our data. So we're basically saying if we have a data view, I want to pull that value out, and I want to populate the liquid fill gauge based on that value, right? So it's a single value. And so you see data view.single.value. That's just a Power BI API. That's how they manage their data, their single values. So I want to say if we don't have a gauge, I want to call the constructor, which is just a function. If we do have a gauge, then I want to update it. That way it doesn't redraw it. It just updates the number inside of the gauge. So I'm going to copy and paste this update code here. Yep, and then also we're going to have just a private variable called gauge here. Okay, so one thing that that is typically missed is that we need to say in our visual TS file, we need to say what TypeScript definition files we're going to be using, right? And the way that Power BI does this is using just the AMD dependency. So I'm going to put that in the top of our file here. So that's basically saying liquid fill gauge.js, I need you. Come into my file and make your references available. Let's see if I can mute this. So that ding right there, just actually, maybe I should not unmute that. That's just basically saying that there's a problem with my compilation. And so I go back to my command prompt here. It says, cannot find load liquid fill gauge. Something is wrong. You'll probably bang your head against the wall with this. I did it many times. And basically, I don't know what's going on, but usually what I'll do is have to kind of shut things down a little bit and restart my server, and it should work. Hopefully it works. Yeah. So I think there's a bug in PBI Viz start which doesn't recognize when you add new typings or something like that. So I just restarted my server. I guess I didn't need to close the files in VS Code. It's just a tendency. So let's take a look. Okay, so it doesn't render. Does anyone know why it doesn't render? What? Right. There's no data. Right. So you'll see as soon as I assign data to that, it recognizes it. Right, this is my custom visual. And so that's the liquid fill gauge. When it first is instantiated, it will fill up like that. There's an option to shut that off as well. But that is the default visual that I just took right from GitHub and is now rendering in Power BI. So there's a little trick to take a little segue here into Power BI Desktop. Whenever I want to test data, so you can put test data inside of your JSON file, and you can say, if I don't have data, just grab it from some JSON file, or you can use Power BI Desktop to create a data set and then upload that data set to Power BI. So all I did here is in Power BI Desktop is I entered data, and I said, here's the value is 55. I called it data, and then I said publish that to Power BI. After I published it, it created this data set here called sample, and then with the data table and the value there. Yeah. Okay, so that's great, right? So we got our visual, but some things I don't like about it. It's one value, meaning that I have category data here, which is good for when you want to group things, like in a more sophisticated visual, you would want to group things and have subsets of data, do cross-filtering and all that kind of complicated stuff. In this case, I just have one value that I want to display. And right now I have category data and I have measure data. Or really all I want to do is just have measure data. I just want one value. So let's switch back here. So we want to simplify that. We want to turn what's over here into what's over there, which is just basically assigning one value. And how we're going to do that is, let's see. Why does it do that? I think the left button goes all the way back to the beginning. Reference our code. Okay. So what we're going to do is look at how to just simplify the settings. And I'm going to introduce you to a file in our project called capabilities.json. What that does is it defines all, it's like metadata for that format pane that we saw here. Let me switch over. It's metadata for here to define what your property names are, what your data set is going to look like. Is it a table? Is it a single value? Whatever it may be. And you do that inside of the capabilities.json, and there's, let's take a look here. There's this data roles property inside of that JSON, and that defines how, if you want category data or measure data, and if you want them to be a grouping data type or just a regular measure. So you notice here category data and measure data. That's what is rendered right here when you use that custom visual. So let's go back to my blog here. So this is part 2. This is data roles, capabilities, mappings, and this is what's included here. This is the modified version. So all we're going to do is we're going to say we want one data role. We want to call it value. We want the code or the underlying key of that to be value, and we want the kind to be 1, which means it's just a measure, meaning a single value. And then what you'll do is you'll say, inside of data view mappings, let's see if I can get it a little bigger. Inside of data view mappings, it's a custom way that Power BI says, here's like the metadata for my mapping. Here's my data view that's coming in from the underlying Power BI data data repository, and here's how I want to map the metadata to the actual value, and that's inside of data view mappings. And all I'm saying here is it's a single value. Remember we saw before, we saw data view.single.value. It's gonna pull from here. So I'm just going to copy this file into here. Save that. And so now when we reload that visual, it should just have that one property. So let's take a look. I think I can just refresh. I might have to, yeah. So you see starting to see the power of that development visual inside of Power BI. Like I didn't have to do much before. That would have been a compilation. It would have been a bunch of work. Yeah.
Does Power BI sort of handle validation? So if someone tries to throw a string into their value,
yeah,
does it get sort of captured
mm-hmm.
at that point, or do you need to sort of deal with it?
Right. Yeah. So the question was, how does Power BI deal with validation? Right. And the when you define your data types, you say what data type it will be, right? You'll say it's an int, it's a bool. We'll look at that in a second. And then it won't allow you to drag a value that doesn't match that type into the value. But what I did find in doing this is that they don't have a really easy way to define like range validation or like regex validation, stuff like that. So I'm working with the team to help them figure that out. But for right now, it's just the pure data type validation. Yeah. What's that? Exactly. So yeah. So don't make any assumptions about what data is coming in, because you in your code you'll have to say, read this data. Is this data what I expect? Yeah. Try parse. That kind of stuff. Yeah. Yep. Yep. So that's the second section. That's just basically defining how you want to map your data to these properties here. Let's take a look. So this visual is pretty powerful. I mean, you saw the Power BI, the liquid fill gauge default settings has a ton of format options, from wave color to rise time to number of waves to thickness of the circle, all of that stuff. It's a lot of different properties, and it took me a bunch of time to figure out exactly how to map everything together and make it all work. And one of the issues that I ran into is that this currently doesn't work with your local development visual. So you actually have to package your visual to test out the format properties. The fix will be in production in a couple weeks. I gave them a really hard time about it. I know all those guys over there, so they're hopefully going to push that out soon. But what that does give us is the ability to see how we package a visual into, basically zip it all up so you can share it with a friend. So I do have that third part of this series here, which is custom format properties. This is the final part of the series. I will probably do another one on how to create your icon for the custom visual and how to submit it to the gallery. And then I also want to look at, so since I've done this, I've been contacted to create a couple more visuals that people want. And so it's kind of cool that people are wanting this, and I think that it will start to take off. So the challenge for everyone is to go and find some simple visual out on GitHub, make sure it's MIT or some license that lets you share with attribution, and then and try this out. So we're getting some good movement on it. So basically, we have this format properties. So here, let's take a look at Power BI. So here, you'll notice if I click here on this roller paintbrush thingy, there's like 0 properties. It's not customizable at all right now. So what we want to do is see what it takes to get something to appear right there. And I have a simplified version from what I have on the blog post. All right, so this is super complex right now. I'm trying to help them figure out how to improve this, but there are a couple of secrets, hidden things that you have to kind of make work. So the first thing that you want to do is define in your capabilities JSON You want to define what format properties you want, what their data types are going to be. And then you'll set the values in this enumerate object instances method. You will get the properties from, and I'll talk about all this in a second. We'll go through it. We'll get the properties in this utility that they created, and then you'll have some sort of state for those properties. And I'm just using a settings variable inside of my visual code to hold that state. So inside of capabilities.json, you're going to have a new thing. We saw data roles and data view mappings. We now have an objects property, which is keyed by the groupings that you want of properties. So if we go back up here, you can see I have text. I also have circle, and I also have wave. So you do that there. And each one of those groupings of properties has a display name. So I want it to be text with a capital T, so I put a display name there. The properties that I want inside of that group are going to be things like the fill color of the wave. Do I want it to be a color option? Do I want it to be a slider? Do I want it to be a text box? You know, whatever that may be. So that is that. That's how it renders. And so so that was capabilities JSON. That's how you define your format properties and their data types. The settings of these values is going to be inside of this method called enumerate object instances. And so I don't know the backstory, but I believe that they overloaded this objects inside of capabilities JSON to also mean format properties because the names don't quite line up. And then there's this enumerate object instances, which pulls in your capabilities JSON, looks at your object property, and just enumerates over each of the sub-properties there. And so what I'm saying is, if the value is text, I want to push into my Power BI state the values that are being read from my settings object. So you have text color wave, text color min value. I set all these up, and it goes on to do wave and circle as well. So let's just go and set up our capabilities JSON first. So this is a snippet. I didn't want to do everything. I just wanted to do one property just so we could keep it simple here. So this is objects, capabilities. Make sure I go to the right one. Let me just close out of this other one. Yep. So here we're going to do objects. So here what we're saying is we want a wave group. We want it to be called wave with a capital W. And here are the properties. We want wave color. We want it to be called color. And we want it to be a color selection drop-down pop-up thingy. And how you do that is you say fill solid color true. Initially, I thought that was like a Boolean, as in we wanted a Boolean type. But that's just saying, yes, I want that to be the data type. You have a question? Yes. Yeah. Out at I have the link here at the end, but it's basically the GitHub repo has all the documentation. Yeah. And I'm working with them too to help improve the documentation around this. Yep. So you can have number, bool, color, things like that. All right. So then we talked about this enumerate object instances method. Again, what that does is it looks at your capabilities JSON, finds that objects property, loops through all your groups. When it finds a match here inside of my case statement, it will add the properties there. Let's get this in VS Code. All right, so we're going to go into Visual TS. We're going to add that method. All right, I'm going to bring my font down just a bit so we can see it. Is that okay? Okay, so enumerate object instances is going to loop through each of the groups and say, if I find wave, I want to set the wave color, and here's the JSON object. I'm going to pull it from settings. So the interesting thing here is that the liquid fill gauge that I used uses the actual hex value of the color as a string, whereas Power BI uses this fill type, and it has a solid and color. It's a JSON object representation of that color. So this is just a mapping between the two. When I say wave color colon solid color, this wave color, it's a way to just map between those two. So the settings, obviously we don't have a settings object. We'll look at that next. First thing we wanted, yeah, so that ding right there was saying you're not compiling, which is totally okay at this point. So there's this object enumeration utility.js file. It basically has a get value method, and what that does is it goes inside of the Power BI metadata with a group and a key, and it pulls out the current value. This is just a helper method that they will integrate into the official SDK soon. So what I'm going to do, so this object enumeration utility here, I modified it a little bit to add a max value. I had to put a max value on one of my properties, so I just added that here. So you should probably use mine for now if you're gonna use it, and that's all out on my blog if you need a reference. So I'm gonna go File, Object Enumeration Utility.js. Great. So that's that file. We're going to save it. Yep. Great. Here. So now what I need to do is basically complaining and saying I don't recognize this file. So I'm just going to go ahead and add it to my the tsconfig.json. We talked about that before. So so you basically, anytime you add a new file, you have to add it to this. And I'm working with them too to see if we can just get like some wildcard support in here. All right, so it shouldn't be, okay. So right now it's going to rebuild. It's going to fail because we don't have a settings object yet. So let's go ahead and grab that. So the settings object is actually just a mirror of the open source version of Liquid Fill Gauge, that default settings object. I basically am just mirroring that inside of my own settings object, but instead of pulling hard-coded values, I'm pulling the values from the Power BI metadata that the user would set in the UI and pushing them to this settings object. So here, for example, I'm calling my enumerate object, so this method here, the get value. Where is it? This get value. I'm calling that. Power BI knows how to pull the values from the in-store metadata. I'm saying I want to pull a number. I'm going to pass in the objects, which is a reference to the metadata. I'm saying text min value in 0. Here's the one that needed the max value. We're going to focus on wave color, and I have a snippet right here. So we're going to define a settings variable inside of our Visual TS here. Just going to hold the settings. And then what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate, and we're going to initialize the gauge here. And reformat. Okay. So what I'm doing is, let me just, here. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm initializing that. It's that same property that was included in the open source version of this visual. I'm setting the wave color of that object to the value that's inside of the metadata, Power BI metadata. I'm saying it's in the wave group, it's called wave color, and I want to give it a default color of this value here. I want to take whatever is returned from the metadata and take the solid color, because remember before what I said is the open source visual needs the hex of the color, not the actual fill object. So that should be represented. I'm not, let's see, object enumeration utility. So let me see here. Make sure I have it in tsconfig. And I don't know if that matters, but I think that might be an ordering issue. Let's see. All right, let's try and build it again. object enumeration utility dot. Oh, I think it's, here we go. It's TS, not JS. That should work. Okay, who thinks this is going to work? Everybody should raise their hand. Come on. All right. So let's refresh this here. Okay, why doesn't it work? Because we didn't package it and upload it. There's this bug that I spent a lot of time trying to, like, why isn't this working? I emailed them and said, oh yeah, that doesn't work. I was like, thanks a lot. So, PBI Viz package. So that's going to go through all your code. It's going to minify it. It's going to compress it. It's going to package it up into a PBI Viz file. So if we go cd dist, you'll see that we have liquidfillgauge.pbi viz. You'll then use that viz file in your report. So you go here, import custom visual. Let's see, where is it? I think we did temp. Where did we do it? PBI viz, liquid fill gauge. Yeah. Yeah. So this is a bunch of warnings. It'll warn you like 18 times that this is not Power BI code. Don't sue us if you have any issues. So that's just going to import that PBI viz, it's just a zip file, into Power BI. You can see here there's this new toolbox icon. That's the visual there. I'm going to select this here. And you should see now we have a wave, has a color. When I set it, it should turn black. All right, great job, John. Woo! So that's yeah. So that's the entire, like, there's no tricks here. Like, this is just me coding from nothing to open source, pretty much everything you need to build out a custom visual. So we have a little bit more time. Do we have more time? How much time? Huh? How can you debug it? That's a great question. What you can do, what I like to do, is go here into my Visual TS inside of my constructor and just say debugger. So what that's going to do is when it gets to the debug point in your visual, it will stop the browser-based debugger at that line of code, and you could just debug like you would debug any sort of JavaScript. And then you can also, when you package, you can pass a no min flag so that it doesn't minify your JavaScript. Yeah. So how much time do we have? 5 minutes? Okay, so 2 options. Let's do this. Let's talk about streaming data set, because I think this is really interesting. I think you guys would use it. And then it'll just take a few minutes. So let's see. Let's just go to app.powerbi.com. So this is a highly requested feature. I don't know. Yeah, there we go. Basically, before I joined Power BI Embedded, what you used to have to do is you used to have this OAuth dance when you wanted to push data to Power BI. You would have to sign up for a Power BI app. You would have to, in Azure Active Directory, you would have to get secrets and tokens, and you would have to do an OAuth dance with the person who wanted to get to that data. But it doesn't really work in some integration scenarios where all I want to do is just push data to Power BI using a key. And so what streaming data sets allows you to do is to do just that. You have a URL which has a key embedded in that URL as a query string parameter, and it maps directly to a table in a data set, and you pass it a JSON object, and then that will be fed directly into that data set. So for example, if you go here and you say, and here is this streaming data set, you can see that, yep, streaming data in Power BI, you say add data set. You select that you want the API instead of So there's the other option too, where you can go to you can set up PubNub to push PubNub events directly into Power BI. In this case, what we're going to do is just an API. We want to call this data, we want a value, and we want a number. So what this is saying is we're going to create a streaming data set. It's going to have one property called value. It's going to be a number. And here's the JSON that you're going to have to push to that. I always select on there because why not? So that's going to create your data set. It's going to give you a push URL. You're going to be able to push JSON data to that data set. So I'm going to do this. Here's this Chrome poster plugin, and you pass it a value. You can pass it a JSON here, and I think it will, yeah. So what I'm going to do is just basically post a JSON value to that streaming data endpoint. So I'm going to post, and I should get a 200 here. Yeah, 200 OK. So now we have value. It's 98.6. OK. So I'm going to click done. Here's my new data set that I created. I'm going to say create a report using that streaming data set. That report is going to include my custom visual that I just created, temp PBA. This is one we just created, right? I'm going to select it, assign that value from that streaming data set, and it's 98.6. Okay? Now, if I go here to Chrome and I post a 1 inside of that report, it's going to give me a 200 post into that data. Now, when I go here and save this report, I'll save it as Ignite test. So I'm viewing that report here. I'm going to pin that to a new dashboard. I have a few dashboards here. Right. So because this is based off of that data here, what I should be able to get that value to update in real time. So where the liquid fill gauge is kind of above its bounds. And so as you can see here, right, this is kind of cool for IoT scenarios, right, where you need near real-time data visualization. You could just do an HTTP post with a JSON object, right? So let's stop there. I was going to talk about Power BI Embedded, but we just ran out of time. So what I can do though is I can stick around and talk to anybody about that, and I'll also do a blog. So if you want to see a very quick how to use Power BI Embedded, just go to johngallant.com, and I'll be blogging about it soon. So any questions? Yeah. Okay, so the question was, the question is how, when you have a single value, what do you do? Let me just get to the right thing here. This is Power BI Embedded. Yeah, so you have a single value. What are you supposed to do when you have a complex value or a data set or categories and all that? So what I would do, and that might be a future blog post, is how to do that. What I would do is go into my capabilities JSON and define my data roles and say, here's what I want this. The value coming in, I expect it to be a table of data. And there's a specific attribute that you set to your data type and say table. You can also do grouping and measure as well. So inside your capabilities, but it does get more complex. It's not easy. And what I would do is I would find a visual. So all the Power BI visuals are open source. So I would find one that is similar and see how they're doing it, and then copy that code. Also, you can always ping me. You can go to Stack Overflow and we can get you the data you need. Yeah. I'm sorry? can you create private visualizations? Yes. So what you do is you do a PBI Viz package, and you send that package to somebody to use it, and you only upload it to your in your report. So when you share a report, it'll include that visualization. And right. So what are the restrictions around sharing custom visuals, and can I lock it down to just me? Yeah, so we call those organizational visuals, right? And the guidance right now is just share the reports and limit the reports to an organizational group within Power BI. Therefore, those visuals won't be shared out. And really, the visual is just it's dumb, right? It doesn't have any data in it. So if you share the visual, you get hold of that PBI Viz. Unless it has IP in it, doesn't really matter. I think the data, underlying data, is more important, and we do that through Power BI roles and groups. But we can talk more if you want. Yeah. Yeah.
I normally do automation of the UI.
Yeah.
I often find those visuals very hard to automate with the tools we use. Do you know any tool that we get into the visual and get the data inside there?
Okay, so UI visualization, UI automation for PBI Viz? Yeah. Right. Yeah, so I think it's just standard. I mean, it would just be standard UI instrumentation. I think it should just work, because in the end, it's really just HTML and JavaScript.
Most of it comes as an image.
So it's actually not an image. Yeah, so it is JavaScript being drawn by D3.js using a canvas. So if you do a right-click inspect element, you'll see all of the elements that make up that visualization. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, thank you.